Natural disasters are becoming more frequent and more violent all over the world, but nowhere are they more ferocious than in Asia Pacific. Good legislation can help communities become less vulnerable to disasters. It can strengthen their ability to deal with the hazards they face, and it can smooth the path of humanitarian aid. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, international help, a massive amount of international help, was critical to saving lives and restoring dignity. But Indonesia's laws were not yet ready.
The tsunami experience opened our eyes on humanitarian works that we need to deal with. It brought hundreds of players or organizations entering the province or country. We need to have clear arrangement for them to be able to work and effectively deliver humanitarian aid.
Visa delays, customs problems, tax rules, and other hurdles slowed relief. Some international actors brought inappropriate aid or provided poor quality care. The Indonesian Red Cross, known as PMI, played a key role in advocating for stronger disaster legislation. In 2007, a new disaster management law was passed with some important provisions on international relief.
The most important aspect of DM law is recognition of government of Indonesia to the role and responsibility of international organization, and also commit to support relevant facilitation as well as to clarify the role and responsibilities during emergency response in Indonesia.
However, more detailed rules were still needed. To help the authorities draft specific implementing regulations about the law's provisions on international relief, PMI was able to call on a new international standard, the Guidelines for the Domestic Facilitation and Regulation of International Disaster Relief and Initial Recovery Assistance, known as the IDRL Guidelines. The guidelines were developed by the International Federation after 6 years of study and consultations with governments and humanitarian agencies. They were unanimously adopted by the states party to the Geneva Conventions in 2007, and it was just what the Indonesian authorities were looking for.
It helped us in providing the main points of issues that we should consider in developing the guidelines on the role of international organizations and non-government international organizations in emergency.
In 2008, a specific regulation was adopted on international relief, and national guidelines providing more detailed procedures are now being completed, inspired by the IDRL guidelines.
Regulation and guidelines also promote and facilitate the international assistance, including entry point, type of assistance, clearance procedure for personnel, goods and equipment, relief distribution, protection and security, as well as monitoring and evaluation.
PMI will continue to help as the national guidelines take shape.
Indonesian Red Cross, PMI, has been a significant player on disaster management. When we develop legal products, we will need to work with PMI to enrich us with their field experience.
In Sri Lanka, finding housing for the more than 1 million people displaced by civil war and by the 2004 tsunami has been an enormous logistical and financial challenge for the Sri Lanka Red Cross Society and other agencies. However, the legal problems were sometimes even more difficult to overcome. Conflicting claims to property, lack of formal title to land or homes, incomplete land registers, and legal rules that made choosing where to rebuild and whom to house extremely complex. Property law rules also sometimes led to results that blatantly discriminated against women. In part, this was tied to the diverse traditions of Sri Lanka's various ethnicities.
Amongst these ethnicities, there are a number of customary laws. They all depend on the ethnicity and also where they are. So they are quite diversified customary laws. Mainly being sometimes a female may not be given the land of her own parents, but may be handed over to the husband. And eventually due to the tsunami, the husband may have passed away, and now a issue was there that these properties goes back to the parents or to a brother of the family instead of the female.
In the absence of formal legal solutions, the Sri Lanka Red Cross turned to informal methods to help resolve disputes.
At certain places, we were able to bring their consensus, as we have made use of what is called the village councils. So we have made use of these processes whereby all parties are met and discussed in details and then given consideration by the parents or the husbands. We have been able to somehow allow the female headed household to have the legal ownership of these properties.
Like the Indonesian Red Cross, the Sri Lanka Red Cross now advocates for the development of better law to be ready for such issues in the future. Empowering communities to enhance their own safety and resilience is an essential element of risk reduction, and the integration of community and civil society into disaster management makes it far more effective. Legislation can ensure this participation. In 2009, Tropical Storm Ketsana devastated the Philippines and drove home the urgency of disaster risk reduction. In the aftermath, the Philippine National Red Cross and other agencies lobbied hard for new legislation. As a result, a new law was passed in 2010.
Number one, it is a very proactive law. It doesn't only focus on response, unlike the previous law, but then it's really looking into preparedness as well as risk reduction measures like mitigation. Unlike before, the previous law focuses on the 5% calamity fund can only be utilized during disasters. So for example, if you wanted to do preparedness measures or mitigation measures, it will only be done if the area was already declared as a state of calamity. Whereas this new law provides that the fund can be touched even without the disaster, actually because the focus of the new law really is that the preparedness or even mitigation measures should start in the community.
The input of civil society and the responsibility it has is spelled out in the new legislation. Future challenges include changing mindsets, particularly at the local level, where the Red Cross will continue to play a key role.
The way forward really is for Red Cross also at the grassroots level to educate the local chief executives as well as those key decision makers in the community on the new law, on how they can make use and how they can strengthen their existing structures to make sure that when the next disaster strikes, they are able to cope and mitigate better.
These examples show that good disaster legislation can strengthen the ability of communities to cope with the hazards they face, and it can facilitate the distribution of appropriate, effective, and timely international humanitarian aid. Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in Asia Pacific are supporting their governments to develop strong laws to facilitate and regulate international relief, reduce legal hurdles to rebuilding homes damaged by disasters, and to activate preventive activities at the community level. We recommend that governments in the region draw on these experiences and collaborate with their national societies to increase their legal preparedness for disasters.
I think as a Philippine Red Cross or any Red Cross or Red Crescent institution for that matter, we are better positioned not only because of our principles, but we are always auxiliary to government. And by doing so, this as our strength and our aim in working together is to build a strong and resilient community who are able to cope and mitigate the disasters that they face.